Alright, ladies and gentlemen, Stevie J from AngryMarks.com, and UFC 158 is in the books. And I will try to not ramble on as long as Diaz did in his post-fight interview. But we'll get to that. Let's start with the Facebook prelim fights. George Roop defeated Ruben Duran by unanimous decision, 2 29-28s and a 30-27. It's kind of amazing seeing a guy that's over 6 feet tall fight at bantamweight. And Roop definitely used that size to his advantage, and he kind of needs to because he was a 12-10 fighter before this fight. The guy needs to find something to latch on to take his career above mediocrity, and maybe bantamweight will be the division for him. Our second prelim, and the only one that got bonus the entire night, was Issei Tamura and TJ Dillashaw, and Dillashaw finished him off 26 seconds into round 2 with strikes from knees and punches, so good for him. Good showing by TJ Dillashaw. Our third fight was a comeback of sorts as Rick the Horror Story is in the win column again, 3:05 into the first round via a finish of Quinn Mulhern, who came over at 18-2 from Strikeforce, but just couldn't get anything going on Story, who was just, he looked crisper, he was more aggressive, and he definitely went out there looking to finish the fight, and that's exactly what he did. So hopefully this will be the resurgence of Rick's Story in the welterweight division, because he had been on a skid there for a while, losing 3 out of 4. But maybe now this will be a step in the right direction. The first fight on the FX card was really nothing to write home about. John Makdessi won a unanimous decision, 29-28 times 3 over Darren Cruikshank. I really don't even want to comment on the fight. It was just, it was there. It was 15 minutes of Makdessi just outstriking him, and what else can you say? Second fight at least was a little more exciting as Jordan Main went out there and made a statement against Dan Miller of the Fighting Miller Brothers. He really wanted to show that he belongs in the UFC, and I think he made his point in style. Why do I say that? Because very few people stopped Dan Miller, and he did just that, 4:42 into the first round via TKO. Speaking of finishes, at 3:06 of the first round, Darren Elkins won his 5th straight fight at featherweight against Antonio Cavallo. That guy should be moving up in the ranks rather quickly now. Elkins looked absolutely fantastic in this bout. Our main event of FX, which deserved to be on the pay-per-view more than the first or second fight of the pay-per-view itself, was Patrick Cote and Bobby Volker having an absolute war. And these rounds were pretty darn close. I had Cote winning the first, and you could give the first round to either man, but as I saw it, he won the first, and he won the fight overall, 29-28, but it was damn close, and both these guys were going for broke, and by the third round, you could tell that Volker was taking advantage of the fact that Cote had pretty much swung himself out, but, you know, maybe Volker won the third, but he didn't win the fight overall, and that's what you gotta do, so he didn't get the nod here. Patrick Cote did, and the crowd in Montreal was very happy about that. Now, the first fight on the pay-per-view itself was the drizzling shits. And I apologize if I offend either of these fighters for saying so, but Colin Fletcher, Mike Ricci, you did a shitty job of deserving this pay-per-view spot. Cote and Volker should have been there instead of you guys, because you went out there and did nothing for 15 minutes. I mean, the crowd was just booing relentlessly, and they deserved it, because there was so much of the time nothing was going on. They were jabbing to feel each other's range out, but they weren't actually hitting each other. They were throwing kicks, but they weren't actually touching each other. It was just, for the love of God, do something. And Ricci did a little more of nothing than his opponent did, but they both did nothing. I really didn't want either one of these guys to win, but Mike Ricci picked up a unanimous decision. He got a 30-27 on all 3 cards. And the next fight wasn't any better. Nick Ring and Chris Camozzi. And this one was actually a split decision. 2 29-28s and a 28-29 made Chris Camozzi the winner. I actually had it 29-28 for Ring, but I don't even think it matters. Mercifully, the pay-per-view portion of this event was saved because the 3rd, 4th, and 5th fights were all fantastic. Jake Ellenberger went out there and crushed Nate Marquardt, which I think a lot of people were expecting and even predicting, but still, when you see a former champion get absolutely destroyed by somebody, it's still a statement-making fight. Jake Ellenberger clearly wants to move up in the welterweight rankings to one of the top spots. And he's going to get his chance, but more on that in just a minute. The official time was exactly 3 minutes into round 1 by KO, so Jake the Juggernaut does it again. Our co-main event was the number 1 and number 2 contenders for welterweight in a slobber knocker of a fight that's probably going to be the fight of the night. I'll have to check what the fight bonuses are after I'm done with this recap, but let it be said that Johnny Hendricks went out there throwing left hands that we all know are devastating, and Carlos Condit got rocked a couple of times, but ate most of the punches that he threw. And he would end up on the ground, Hendricks would take him down, and Condit would try to sweep. Condit would go for submissions. Condit was constantly busy, and then when they'd get on the feet, Condit would actually land a couple of good shots, and you wouldn't see Hendricks get his bell rung per se, but you would see he'd feel it, and then he'd back off a little bit, and then sooner or later he'd go for another takedown. Then he'd come back out for the next round, and he'd start swinging away with reckless abandon again. It was a fantastic fight to watch. If you're a fight fan, all 15 minutes of Condit and Hendricks was amazingly fun. And at the end, it got even better because Hendricks picked up the decision, which he'd rightfully earned. He landed more damaging blows. He got all the takedowns he wanted to. I think something like 11 total, maybe more than that. And then he cut a great promo afterward. They announced 29-28 times 3, and Joe Rogan went over to him, and he said, "I want this fight in 5 months in Montreal. Hey, I'm a GSP fan too, Montreal. I want this fight. Please, GSP, give it to me. I'll do anything. I want this fight. And if you don't give it to me, I'm going to hire a referee. I'm going to come to your house, and I'm going to do something about it." Awesome. God bless Johnny Hendricks. That was great. If GSP doesn't take the fight with him, well, I guess I'm kind of spoiling the fact that GSP won the main event by saying that, but I think a lot of people would have assumed that GSP would beat Nick Diaz anyway, so let's just get right to that. It was 5 rounds, and a lot of people did predict the decision other than me, but still a total one-sided domination by George St-Pierre. He took Nick Diaz down at will. He busted him up with elbows. When Diaz would try to sweep or roll or grab an armbar or do anything, GSP countered it perfectly. He'd hop from one side of his body to the other to block anything that Nick could think about doing. He could never get a dominant position. He gave up his back constantly and turtled up to avoid shots, to the point that GSP was actually getting warned for shots to the back of the head. And then Diaz, like the punk he can often be in a fight, he would throw shots after the horn. In fact, in the 3rd round, he did it so blatantly. He was laying on his back in the guard and threw a shot after the horn, and Eve Levine said, "You do that again and I will disqualify you." Eve Levine gave a fair and just warning. He earned it and deserved it for throwing that shot after the horn. But regardless, it went the full 25. GSP executed a picture-perfect game plan. Nick Diaz was baffled by it in his post-fight interview. He thought it was perhaps a conspiracy theory that GSP knew everything he was going to do before he even did it. No, that's just good strategy and good execution on GSP's part. He got a 50-45 unanimous decision. GSP thanked Nick Diaz, told everybody in Montreal that he deserves some respect because he was a hell of a fighter and a great boxer, and he was trying to have a kickboxing and wrestling match with him and not have a boxing match because he knew he'd lose if it was a straight-up boxing match, and his jiu-jitsu game was incredible, and he was really trying hard to get a submission, and he really respected Nick Diaz. In fact, he told the fans that he had seen Nick Diaz fight Robbie Lawler before he was even in UFC himself. So he gave Nick Diaz a tremendous amount of respect. And Nick Diaz being Nick Diaz, when it came time for his interview, he said, "I'd like to thank George for showing me that respect, which I think I deserve and I've earned." So immediately he took his one chance to be a babyface and burned it with the crowd. And then he went on to say, "I'm not sure I want to do this anymore as a fighter. I don't know if I've got anything left now." And the crowd immediately starts chanting, "Na na na na, hey hey, goodbye." Well, they'd been chanting rude things at Diaz all night long anyway, including some things I won't repeat here. But suffice it to say, Diaz was given this opportunity to be gracious and humble. I mean, he had even set the stage for it by giving GSP a hug and raising his hand in victory right as the fight was over. And Ariel Helwani was tweeting things like, "Aw, friends!" But still, Nick Diaz is Nick Diaz. He can't help himself. He doesn't plan what he says. He just does it. So, Montreal crowd could have loved him. The table was set, and he still swept everything off the table, and it crashed in a heap on the floor. That's your UFC 158 recap. I'm Stevie J from AngryMarks.com.